Hey guys, welcome back to Ancient Amnesia Podcast. This is Josh and Dave.
Hey guys, how you doing?
And I got to say, I was talking to Dave last week and he blew my mind. I mean, Dave lives in the Florida area. We always talking about what we're doing for shows and reading stuff and doing stuff for the site. But Dave has some pretty good stories to tell us about ancient America. And when we think about ancient America, we really, there's a lot of things that we think about, Indians and other cultures. We're, unpacking this new thing about there being all kinds of Mississippian cultures out there, the Cahokian cultures, these kind of cities. And sure enough, there's one in Dave's backyard. So I started talking to him, and he's going, man, you have to see these petroglyphs. They're in Florida. And I'm going, wow, I didn't realize there were petroglyphs in Florida. And he's like, yeah, let me show you. So he took either geoglyphs.
Yeah.
He took a space shuttle, and as you can see, he's in his spacecraft there. I think he's somewhere around the International Space Station. There's the Earth.
No, I'm not flying around that thing. They've had too much trouble, man. I've got my own space station.
So what he's going to do is he's going to fly from space down to where he lives.
All right.
I guess it's near, isn't it, Dave?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to, kind of start this out with, I'm an engineer, and my thing is I kind of go online and I study kind of nerdy stuff and projects and construction and engineering and things like that, just, as an interest and a hobby. And I came across this place near us within a few miles called the Bayou Barge Canal. And what they did was in 1914, they decided, well, Pinellas County is a huge island basically with a tiny peninsula. So let's build a barge canal across it instead of sailing these barges all the way around this big peninsula. And so what they did was they brought out a dredge that actually walked itself from a point out to a spot where they began to dig the canal. And the canal was about 35 to 40 feet wide, about 15 to 20 feet deep in places. And they would just drive these barges down this canal and cross, Pinellas County, which is the Tampa area, St. Petersburg area. And it would like really enhance the commerce and everything here. And but what happened was when they started digging, they started finding all kinds of artifacts. And so they had to actually kind of adjust their layout because they were digging right through the middle of an Indian area where there was artifacts. And we're not talking like a few hundred years old. We're talking thousands of years ago, and this is
I guess the problem with Florida, the problem with Florida, Dave, probably I guess would be that it gets erased, right? It's like a jungle. It gets gains a lot.
Right.
Water's probably erased a lot of history there. It's like
exactly salt.
But we realize
salt
around
dissolves
the world,
everything.
Yeah, any kind of coastal culture, is their remains are under the water for a large degree. So Florida is probably a hard place for us to even find stuff like this.
Well, it is. Well, here we go. We're going to zoom in on that Cross Bayou Barge Canal here. You'll see it right away. It's a very straight line. I've got it pinpointed right there. Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so basically this straight section right here was the first section they dug. They actually dug that from north to south. And here, up in this area, this long, dark canal that kind of turns into it is where the dredge actually launched down in this area, went all the way over here, and then dug the canal to the south. And then it actually went on and went pretty much all the way to Tampa Bay. And you can see this thing, it goes through industrial areas. You can see where it goes right next to the interstate. And it just kind of goes all the way across Pinellas County, but it never quite wavers until it comes out over on the other side, which is Tampa Bay. Now, this is the Clearwater Largo area. And you can see this comes out a really deep, section of dredge they cut right here so they could get the water flowing. But this used to be what they would do. They would bring barges along this. But one day when they were over here, they were kind of, cutting stuff out and trying to figure out.
When was this happening, Dave?
This was anywhere from 1914 to about 1918. They didn't realize that in this area, this is south of it just a bit, there were all these ancient Indian middens and all these ancient Indian artifact areas along this coast here where there were no houses then. This is all houses now.
What's a shell midden, Dave?
A shell midden is what they do is Indians would basically, they would eat the oysters. They would use the shells to, make things and then when the shells were out, they'd throw them out. But it was just basically a pile of shells that was used like oyster shells for either eating or tools that were worn out. And what they would do is pile them all around their particular encampment, and that would, give them a little bit of protection from, floods. And it also was kind of like a little barrier, in case someone would, come in there and want to rush in on you and attack you or something. But what the real irony of this whole thing is in this area, there were 3 different cultures coexisting at the same time.
What were those cultures?
Yeah. The Manasota culture, you had the Tokobega culture, you had the Temecuen culture, and the Safety Harbor culture. And then there was a little influence from the Whedon culture. And the Whedon culture was spelled with an E, Weed, E-N. But the funny thing is, one of our most popular things we have here in our area is Whedon Island. And it's spelled with an O, Whedon Island. And I'm going to take you there right now. Now, this is a really cool...
Now, what's the age of this particular culture that
the Whedon culture, it was anywhere from 500 BC all the way up to like 15 to 1590. They were really, and they were all across the southeast. They were all over the United States. While
Plato and Socrates were philosophizing in ancient Greece,
sure,
we have a culture here in Florida. And how do you know anything about like where they supposedly came from, or any kind of their prehistory, or do you?
The Whedon culture was basically part of the not the Midwest, but the Southeast and sort of towards the Northeast. There was a lot of Whedon culture, and then it went out to about the Mississippi, where the Mississippian cultures took over. But the funny thing is, they named this Whedon Island, and it's Whedon with an O, and it was actually a Safety Harbor culture that actually used Whedon Island. So this is kind of the funny thing, is people look up the Whedon culture or whatever, but we still see this stuff here. Like, this is Goog Island, and I kayak, and so one day I was out here just checking this out, and I'm going to take you right in there. And we kayaked up here, and I saw this white sand, and I thought, that's kind of unique, because that could mean there's a lot of shell up there and stuff like that. But we went up there and we found like pieces of pottery that were really unmarked. They were almost like, you would call it archaic culture pottery with no markings on it, just a basic chunk of pottery. And
interesting.
Yeah, and there were post holes where posts were in like a circular pattern. And you can see right up here, this little circular area, there's post holes around this area. So that was what they call a carnal house, which is where they would actually put their dead and either burn them or let the vultures eat them.
Yeah.
But, all of this stuff is it's so unique. The reason we're bringing this up here at Ancient Amnesia is not, because it's just like, hey, let's just study the Indian cultures here in this area. It's that they all coexisted. Because if you go from here, we're just going to go north just a hair, and we're going to go to the Safety Harbor Mountain, which was the Tokobega people. And we're going to go over there, and we're going to find that this mountain is like 5 miles, maybe 6 miles from Whedon Island. And these people had this huge mound built in this entire culture when the Tokobega were overlapping with the Safety Harbor people. And the funny thing is the Tokobega Mound is in Safety Harbor. So this is another irony of this area, with the Indians.
These guys obviously lived together at the same period. Were they cousins? Were they complete different cultures, or were they?
They were overlapping. They were overlapping.
Yeah. So they're probably And like you said earlier, as we were talking about this before the show, you were saying that there's no evidence of war in these cultures.
No.
Is that correct?
This mound is right on the coast. They wouldn't have built it right on the coast. If there were war going on, you would have had it set back a bit. A mound of this importance. This mound is 150 feet in diameter and 20 feet tall today.
Oh wow!
So this is after hundreds of years of hurricanes, floods, tides being up, tides being down. It was probably one of the most impressive mounds you've ever seen when it was first built, probably easily 300 feet in diameter, maybe even 100 feet tall, And
wow.
numerous artifacts have been found here. This is an archaeological dig that's gone back for decades. And that's, what's really cool about the area is we have all this stuff. Now, if you've ever heard of Cortez coming and giving all the disease to the Indians, right?
Yeah.
Well, we had a guy named Narvaez which was like Cortez. He was an explorer from the Spanish, and he actually came here and he landed right here on this spot. Now, this spot, this is where he came in, and this is where he first met with the Indians that lived on this sort of, I guess you would call it a coastline right here. Now, this whole coastline comes from these shell middens all the way down. This is all shell middens. So all of these homes are built on mounds of shell that are 15 to 20 feet tall and thick.
Wow.
And they didn't even bother to move them. They just covered them with topsoil, put grass down, landscaping, and built the houses, back in the 20s.
So the houses the people living on right there at the coastline are built on an ancient culture's shell middens?
Yeah. They're actually...
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, they're actually built on, there's a burial ground, and I'm going to take you there. I didn't have that one. This is a friend of mine's house right here in the corner.
I don't think anybody really knows this about Florida.
Now, you see this spot right here, this little kind of green area where the trees are mostly?
Yeah.
This corner spot right here I'm going to take you to is a friend of mine's house. This is where the original mound was, another carnal house right under his house. He's found pilings in the ground. When he was digging and stuff, there was a carnal house there, which means they buried their people and they burned their dead there, right in that spot under this tree. Yeah.
So right there in this just not assuming neighborhood in Florida, right on the coast.
Yeah, they were getting along.
Burial Indian mound.
Actually, right there. I mean, and look at all these mobile homes and everything around it. So, I got all into all this, and I found all this stuff out when I started, looking at this canal. But then I started looking a little harder, and I found this. Now, this area is by the Wagon Wheel Flea Market here, and this is well known in the area for being very heavy. I'll zoom out just a hair. This whole area has been preserved. This is where the barge came through and dug the Barge Canal right there.
Right.
This whole area is preserved on purpose because it is very, very thick and rich with Indian artifacts, and nobody's allowed to go out there and dig or do anything. Then I started looking at Google Earth about 10 years ago when I was kayaking for places, and I found this. And this is just incredible. This is a petroglyph, like you said, or a geoglyph in the ground that is an archer. And you can actually see the archer with his belt right here. The upper part of his body, the head up here is kind of washed out where they dug some mosquito pits. And then you can see the bow and the arrow. And it's basically the only one I found in the area like it. And it is fed by 2 natural springs. And what's cool about these natural springs is this is salt water right here where the hand is. Right underneath here, this water is fresh. You can drink it. It's crystal clear.
And how is that possible? I mean, that's right near it. You would think that's the same water. I mean, what's the process? There
is some type of, in the aquifer, there's some type of process that's going on that's binding the salt. And you can see this little spring. And you have to really, I went in here and I dug my way through there and got in there. And just, you just climb right in it. And it drops off. It's about 20 feet deep. And, it's just crystal clear. Now, this one, it's also fed by this spring right here, but you can see that's got a little bit of a tidal influence and it's brackish. So, I don't know if when they built this originally, both of these were freshwater and all this work on the left might have been done by the Corps of Engineers, but you can see how these 2 springs feed this geoglyph to keep it alive. They knew to dig this out like a ditch and make a canal out of it and actually let the water from these natural springs flow through it and fill it and keep it alive. Look at all the greenery in the middle of that.
Because that's what's happening, because then you have shell midden. Is that shell midden around it, the white?
Yeah, shell midden's just nothing grows on it. It's just shell. There's no nutrients.
Right. So do they also put that there? Is that right?
Yeah. They built, this entire area is, and you can see how it kind of winds its way up. And then there's also up here, I'll show you another thing. You can see another little waterway coming through here. Anytime you see that kind of lumpy look like that,
that's them. Yeah.
That's a waterway, and underneath that is water. And here's another natural spring It's got some tidal influence now because you can see that whiteness in it. You know, that gives you an idea that it's shallow. It's not deep. But yeah, this was in proximity to that. This is, I think, when I've been there, it actually looks like another shell midden that they actually built to keep the water from coming from the northeast and washing over the site where they were living here when, you know, areas up here would flood, you know, because this was no buildings then, you know, this was all just wetlands. And so, yeah, I think they kind of built this little wall right here along this area to kind of drain that out into this natural spring down below. You know, as an engineer, that's what I look like. You know, I look at stuff like that. These little dots, those are called mosquito pits. They basically they dig little mosquito pits, let them fill with water, and then they spray them, you know, and it kills all the mosquitoes. So those are little piles of soil that are dug out of the mosquito pits. But yeah,
who does that's what we do today,
that's the city. Yeah, that's the city that goes out and does that. So this thing is probably anywhere from 500 to 1800 years old, you know, because of the multiple cultures that have existed here, the pottery that's been found there in that particular area. I've personally found pottery shards that had designs on them, but I'm not an expert, you know, and I really couldn't tell what they were. I found tools, stone tools that were really sharp, like little pieces of oyster that were just perfectly polished down like a knife. And you know, you find all kinds of stuff in there like that. But you know, it had to be really old because the pottery was really simple. You know, once again, you know, the pottery has just got no markings on it hardly. It's
that's incredible. So I mean, what we're seeing is that, you know, Florida, just right in that area, you had multiple cultures that spanned thousands of years, all living in seemingly harmony because there was plenty of resources for them to all share, and there would be no reason to kind of build any type of fortified structures or weaponry or armor and stuff. They just lived off the land and lived off the coast and used, you know, shells to build, construct, and create walls. Obviously, this petroglyph is built for a purpose. I mean, that's a pretty cool looking thing, man. That's awesome. We'd like to.
Here's another spot. This is near that big mountain I showed you, the Safety Harbor Mountain. This is a deep spring now. This is another place I've been right here. You can see the Safety Harbor Mountains right up here. So this deep spring, you can just see it. They've dug mosquito holes all around it to kind of, you know, get the mosquito control, because this area is really bad with mosquitoes. This island, if you go out there and walk through this, you're done. You got to come in by boat and walk into this. And it's actually a deep spring. It looks like just a forest. But when you get up there close and you look, it's sort of like a swamp. And in certain areas, you can jump in it and swim, and you can't find the bottom. You know, it's right there. Yeah, it's right there, you know, and it's fresh water. I mean, it's right in the middle of all this salt water, yet it's fresh water. So you can just see where the water's coming out around this area. The fresh water is feeding out through the aquifer, feeding this whole area. So this is where they would have lived. You know, someone would have came in there.
So the aquifer, you're saying it's an aquifer that's probably, what, 400 or 500 feet under the ground or something?
Yeah, not even. It's so close. Yeah, it's really shallow. Yeah. Yeah, and basically what happens is that right there feeds into Tampa Bay instead of Tampa Bay feeding into it, you know. So it's fresh. And, you know, that just, that's what these people did. They found these places where there were big springs. Here's another one. Here's a place called Indian Springs. This is actually like a mile from my house. This is in a guy's front yard. And I've been over there to check it out, and he wasn't too happy about it. But right here is a spring that was an original Indian settlement right in this area. And if I zoom out a little bit, you can kind of see how it's all built over now. But this area where all this grass and all this mangrove was called Indian Rocks. It still is called Indian Rocks. And that was actually an area where there were numerous shell middens and all kinds of settlements found, you know, dating back to over 1500.
The entire area was probably one giant city.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing, is the connectivity between these people, because they weren't warring, was probably supreme. You know, these guys were probably best friends, you know. Yeah,
and living probably one of the best existences that... Yeah.
Well, they didn't have to fight. They didn't have to fight because they had plenty of oysters, plenty of fish. But look at this. This is in this guy's yard. You can actually see this. Oh, They do that to you, don't they? Let's get out of there. See that? He's built a seawall around it. This is the original spring right here. You can see it. It's deep, and you cannot find the bottom. You can jump in there, and you can just, if you were a cave diver, you could go on forever. And then it runs out of here and right over into here, and this entire area right here was basically an Indian settlement. You know, there's been all kinds of tools and pottery found up in there, shell middens right along the water.
That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah. It's a pretty amazing area. Yeah.
That is an amazing area. Thanks for showing us. I mean, we're going to have to look up more about those cultures and maybe zoom in and post some articles on the page and do another show just based on what we're seeing here to, and unpack kind of what was going on in that area. What do they know about it?
It's kind of like when we were talking about planets earlier, it's like a Goldilocks zone, Tampa is, and it always has been. It's like a special area where it doesn't get too cold and it doesn't get too hot, and these people were smart enough to realize that. And that's why they all lived here. That's why they all kind of made this their vacation homes, Yeah.
And they were protected by the water, protected by the oceans. And, it took a while to get down into Florida. Florida's kind of like isolated in itself.
Sure.
So that's really cool. Thanks for showing us. We're gonna basically go back to this stuff and unpack it and see what we can find out about those cultures. You're a genius on this stuff. I didn't realize you knew that much about Indian culture.
Not a genius. I started studying a Barge Canal and how they built it, and all of a sudden I just started seeing all this stuff, and I'm like, oh my God. And what really iced it was finding that geoglyph. It was like, look at this. This is out in the middle of nowhere. I had to go see it. To make sure it wasn't just some ditch they dug, when they put some
really
condos
cool,
nearby.
You actually kayak, you kayaked it, which is, you went out there and actually went through it, which is really, really neat.
If you go out there certain times a year, there's water in it where you could actually, if you were to get the kayak down in there. But those two little springs, the little one, some of the most clear water I've ever seen. And when you get down to the bottom, it's just black. You don't know what's in there. You're not going to jump in there and go swimming because, it could be a giant alligator down there. But, I can't imagine, back then it must have been a priceless source of water for them,
Yeah, golly, that's
all
crazy.
this salt water all around you, and then bam, here's a spot where you can get fresh water. Yeah, pretty cool.
It's unbelievable. I mean, that's kind of how the Mayans did it, in the Yucatan where they had those, cenotes. And
cenotes, yeah.
They were able to, harvest clean water and, God, I mean, just cooling off. But yeah, even thinking about the mosquito population, that's got to be.
Oh, it's bad. Right now, they're thick right now. We're going through the off.
Yeah, like it almost doesn't work to a certain degree too, right? Like off.
You can get hungry. Yeah, you got to spray it on every time you go outside. You got to spray it on. It's just they know better. They'll just come find the one spot you don't have off, and they'll bite it. Little bastards.